Hello and welcome to the InnoFrontier podcast. My name is Jeff, and so excited to be here with Skyler Hare, the CTO of Droplet, and has done a lot of great things in his career. And we're really excited to break it down, Skyler. Just so you know, I think that what we'd love to do is to kind of first start out a little bit about when did you decide that technology was going to be like your career? Were you a little kid? Were you a teenager? Like, at what point did it kind of like hit you that, wow, this is what I want to do?
Sure. Well, first off, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to get the chance to talk about tech. I love geeking out about it. So, I think technology. I was late to the game. We did have dial-up internet. We had a Windows PC that I played on, but I wasn't one of those people who had like a Commodore 64 and was coding on it as a little kid. I was good at school. I went to BYU, and while I was there, I thought I wanted to be a physics major, so that's kind of where I started. And I became an undergraduate and was in a lab working with a laser, and I realized that I didn't want to be in a basement lab working on a laser my whole life. And so I kind of started bouncing around, looking, going through different majors. And in the course of doing that, I eventually took an intro to spreadsheets class in the business tool, and I wrote some VBA code for that class, and that was the first time I'd ever written any code. And so at this point, I'm probably like 23 or something like that, and I just took to it. I loved it immediately. I could feel that it was the way that my brain worked, and so that was kind of where I got my start, was in that class. From there, I started taking. I realized now, okay, this is my major. I need to go into computer science, and then at the same time, just started trying to get jobs where I could write code, and so that's kind of where it started.
Oh man, that's where I discovered it too. We had really horrible dial-up internet, so I didn't even there was not even a chance. I think that the only thing that I actually accomplished in the internet before high school was that I copied a bunch of pictures of Pokemon on just a page, and then I printed it off. That was my internet experience. Like, it was really bad. But the spreadsheet class, yes, yeah. It was so great. And did you go the computer science or did you go the information systems route?
So I was in the information systems route in the business tool, which was what made me take the spreadsheet class. But then after that one, I was like, oh, I got to switch. So I switched to CS, and but I didn't make it very far down that road. I'm actually a dropout, so I ended up getting jobs.
Good for you.
And yeah, so I ended up getting jobs as a software engineer by just self-taught. That wasn't very unusual for me because I was homeschooled for most of K-12, and so it wasn't uncommon or unnatural for me to read blog posts and watch videos and just sort of self-educate. And I think this was right about the time that coding boot camps were starting to get popular. And so if I had just been a little bit later, I probably would have taken one of those. But I ended up just kind of brute forcing it myself through work experience and self-education.
Oh, that's great. And you were pretty lucky, or at least it seems pretty lucky, to get onto Jolt at a really interesting time. Do you maybe just want to explain a little bit about what Jolt is and what the company was going through when you joined it?
Sure. Yeah. So Jolt helps with restaurant operations automation. So the idea was everything you need in the back office, things that were like traditionally done on paper and clipboards, were done now on an iPad. And I was there at a really early time, so we were still actually in a literal basement, and that was how I liked things. So coming out of school, when I was deciding to drop out because I was too impatient to finish another 4-year degree, I was looking for startups because I knew that they would have a little bit of flexibility in my experience. So that was an amazing experience because I kind of went from role to role there, which is pretty typical in a startup. So I started on the sales side. I was doing cold calls, trying to get new customers, and then I started doing a little bit of marketing and working on the website. And so I kind of bounced around, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. It's kind of crazy seeing them now because they're just up the street and on top of a very large business building with hundreds of employees, and so it's just really cool to see the growth.
So having that experience, there's not a lot of developers that I know that have had like direct sales experience, like time on the phones. How or did it help you ever become a better developer?
I think because I took a non-traditional route into software development, I was exposed to a lot of different kind of possible career paths. In the early days, like when I was still in college, I was just trying to pay the bills however I could. So a lot of those jobs were jobs like retention,
Hmm.
escalations, customer success, sales. So I was exposed, not intentionally, but I was exposed to many parts of the business. And before I really got into engineering, and after I was decided I didn't want to do physics, I thought I was going to be a marketer. And so that was kind of the way that marketing was actually the way that I dipped my toe into the startup ecosystem. I thought that I was just largely unaware of startups at the time that I was, had first started into higher education. I just didn't even really know what that was. And so I was introduced to it because I had a friend who wanted to scale his remote tech support business. And he's like, hey, sales, marketing, because I wasn't an engineer at that point. So he says, sales, marketing. Can you help me to figure out how to take these inbound leads that I'm getting and turn them into paying remote tech support customers? And I was like, yeah, I love sales. Let's talk about sales. And after a few hours of me just kind of downloading everything that I thought about sales, he was like, oh my gosh, you have to help me with this. And that was the first time that I had ever even considered the idea that you could just start something, that you could offer a service, and if it was valuable to people, they would just pay you for it. And that started like honestly a decade-long love of startups. And so I think, to kind of get back to your question, having that background of sales and marketing and customer success and support, it gave me a well-rounded view of what it meant to actually run a business. So I felt like I was uniquely prepared to start a startup because I knew at least at a basic level how each of those departments were ultimately going to function. So in
Hmm.
the early days, when you have to wear basically all the hats as a founder, I didn't find it unnatural or overly difficult to kind of flex into these other roles. And I'm a big believer that when you're starting, when you're early days and it's just you and your co-founders and you're thinking about making those early hires, I do believe that you and your founder should actually be the ones doing the roles for a while, at least for a few months, until you go to make a hire. I think this is a common pitfall for a lot of founders where they think, oh, I don't know how to do sales, so let me just hire someone to do sales, or name the function. And I think that's a big mistake. You don't know yet what it feels like to sell into your business, and a lot of times, I mean, unless you're very lucky, a lot of times those early hires are not used to being kind of co-founders with you. They're used to being told kind of what to do. They're used to being an individual contributor at a bigger organization. So it's going to feel unnatural for your first few hires to come in and have so much responsibility and to have so little of the playbook figured out already. That's really kind of your job as the founder, is to sort of carve the path and say, here's how we do things here. And then you bring in, ideally through a good hiring process, you bring in great people who can build on top of that and help you to develop that playbook. But it's a mistake to kind of just toss it over the fence and say, okay, here, sales is your problem now. Thank goodness, right? Which is pretty common.
I will say that's some of the best advice you've ever personally given me. So I do appreciate that. I'm glad that you mentioned it because I think that a lot of people need to hear that. Now you had some experience kind of since, so, I know you hit a short stint at Qualtrics. We just barely missed each other there. I think I was heading out the door while you were coming in. And then, some time at Lead Train. Can you walk us through kind of, the early career, some of the companies you worked at, some of the key things learned on kind of your way to Droplet?
Sure. So the time that I spent at Qualtrics, this was during that time where I was like really anxious to get going. So I started in like a more traditional support role. And while I was there, I was so eager to try to solve problems that I rebuilt the customer success phone queue system. They had a really kind of janky duct tape solution for how they were handling inbound phone calls into that department. And I came out of an all hands meeting where the founder of Qualtrics, Ryan Smith, was talking to everyone, and he said, look, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. If you see something that's wrong in this company, we're still a startup. You need to go and fix it. And so I left that meeting with a lot of enthusiasm, and And it was adopted by the whole team, the whole department. But at first, managers weren't super stoked. They were like, "Hey, you're not an engineer. You're a support rep. You have something that you need to be doing." And I was like, "No, I really feel like this thing that I'm doing can impact the whole department if I do it well." And because I mean, one of the big things that they were worried about in the department was how long a call would sit in the queue. And so there was the frequent reminders to the team, "Hey, we've got 4 calls in queue." But the way the system worked, it wasn't always obvious, like how many calls were waiting and how long they'd been waiting. And so I felt like if we increased the visibility of that queue, that it would mean that the whole department would do better. And so, again, I think, and Ryan Smith has told me this since when him and I have talked. He said that founders tend to make pretty poor employees. I think that was true of me. I had a job to do, and I was like, no, but there's something so much bigger that I can be doing. And so once that kind of got rolled out and adopted, I started looking around. I was like, hey, what else can I do? It was early in my career, and I was probably a little overconfident in my abilities at that point, and thought I can be an engineer. I can do this thing. And so it was opportunistic. Lead Train was an opportunity that came to me through a recruiter, and I met with the founders, and I really loved the idea, and they were super early. And their idea was to build a CRM that was specific to multi-level marketers. So founders had worked at doTERRA, which is headquartered here in the area, and so they had had personal insight into ways in which that business could be run more efficiently, and so they wanted to go and build that product. So they had some early traction and a little bit of funding, and it was a team of 4 when I joined. So I was the 5th person to join. And that's where I met. So there was the 2 founders, and then their head of product who they had hired before me, and a customer success agent. And interestingly, the head of product is actually the head of product at Droplet now. So
no way.
We go all the way back to Lead Train. Him and I worked together closely for years, and so I knew that he was an amazing product leader, and so that's where I met him. So in my career development, that job was the place where I actually turned into an engineer. At Lead Train, they had a lot of different features. Each of them could have been their own product. And so from one day to the next, I was working on an event management tool. And then the next day I was building a website builder. And then the next day I was building an email sequencer. Right? They just had so many ideas, and they were just building. And so for me, it was like I got to work at 10 startups and just with one job. And so that was, and so because I was their first real engineering hire, a lot of responsibility that was put on me that at a traditional place would have been put on a more senior engineer. And so I just had to level up really fast. So that was a big part of my personal education and becoming an engineer. And during that time, I really dealt a lot with imposter syndrome. And I don't know what happened that eventually where I kind of outgrew that. I think to a certain extent, you kind of always feel it. If you're really growing within your roles in your career, you're always going to feel that gap between what the role requires of you and where you feel like you are today. And there's a little bit of like looking around and going, man, there's probably someone who's already there. And so to a certain extent, I feel like that's pretty normal. But it's very common in an engineering role because there's so much to know, right? It doesn't matter how deep you go in one area. You can always go more broad, or you can always go more deep. And there's always someone who kind of chose a different part of the discipline to go deep in. And so when you're up against them, you go, man, this person knows so much more about AWS than me. This person knows so much more about React than me, or what have you. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that you've articulated really, really well that difficult part of why it's hard to shake imposter syndrome as an engineer. And I've never actually thought about that, but it truly is, because there is so much to know. And especially at a young startup where you were asked to do so many different things, like, you were probably building those databases, you were building those, front end, you were making, reusable components, you were doing all of that. And there is always somebody, that can do it better than you. I've never heard it said like that, but I think that it's really true. Yeah. Well, I mean, it might be really hard to dissect. Okay, how do you get over that?
Mhm.
One thing that it sounds like that just from an outsider just hearing this story, something that did help, it sounds like, is just getting those reps in and at least, having built, I can't believe that they were doing an email scheduler and, all these different, a website
Yeah.
builder. Because I mean, that was like 5 years ago and there's no bubble for those things. So you were building all of those.
Right. Yeah, we were building
Um,
all of them from scratch. And so, I mean, thank goodness that we were building all of them from scratch because that was huge for me personally, right? And
right.
formative for my future head of product at Droplet. Him and I worked side by side during those years, and we got a lot of reps in together of saying, okay, brand new idea, we got to invent it from scratch. How are we going to do this? How are we going to find that core of the idea that we can ship quickly, and that's going to be compatible with the bigger vision that we have for what we're ultimately going to build. But at a startup, you don't have the luxury of kind of building the cathedral in one go. You kind of have to start with just a little hut and work your way out. And ideally, you at least plant the foundation in the middle of what will ultimately be your cathedral. Like, not to
Mm,
like
mm.
over not to stretch the metaphor too far, but there's concentric rings of value around any of your product or features. And so correctly identifying what the core value that you offer is key in a startup to being able to get to value quickly, because you don't have the luxury of going really super wide. I think that was something that I also learned at Lead Train, was that we spread ourselves way too thin. Like, the fact that we built so many features that could have been products by themselves probably contributed to the fact that ultimately Lead Train didn't succeed as a startup, because we tried to be too many things to too many different personas, instead of identifying, like, here's our core value, here's where we really crush, and then you can have a vision of ultimately like what you're going to build, but you have to be right about the core of the value you're providing, because then you can ship something small and quick, and if it's really valuable, then you'll find a persona, a customer profile that's willing to deal with kind of your warts or your shortcomings. They'll still pay you, because if you're right about the value, you're going to be right in the heart of their pain. And so they're going to say, hey, I would, eventually I'd love for you guys to tackle all this, but thank goodness you're solving this part that hurts so much. And that's how you can work your way up the value chain too, is because you can charge a little bit today and a little bit more tomorrow and the next day and the next, as the platform improves. You can do feature gating and you can work your way up the value chain.
I think that you just described really well what you guys did at Droplet. So I'm excited to get to that story. So you made the transition from Lead Train to Auth0, which, well, I hadn't heard of them before, kind of looking at your background. Very interesting company. What was kind of going to there, and then maybe, any other experiences that you wanted to share kind of before we get into Droplet?
Yeah, Auth0 is a great one to talk about. So with Auth0, that was part of what, I mean, in addition to the reps and just getting a couple years in, Auth0 was a big part of helping me personally to feel a little bit less like an imposter, because Auth0 was a well-established and respected company, and I was being hired as a software engineer. And so I went through a legit software engineering interview process. It wasn't at a startup. I was interviewing with people who had 10, 15 years ex Microsoft, right? And that was just one of the items on their resume. And so for me, I was like, man, I'm so overwhelmed by the experience of these people that I'm meeting with. These are going to be my manager. This is going to be my peer. And so I was so impressed with everyone that I met with that I was like, man, if I could get a job here, they must see something in me that I'm not seeing in me. So I had just enough of that belief in myself that I was willing to try to go through the interview process. But they were right at the tippity top of the companies that I hoped to be able to transition to. And so, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, and working there is the exact opposite probably of what you got at Lead Train. That experience of working at a larger company, being a software engineer, what did that teach you kind of about your next steps about being now a CTO?
That there were levels to this thing. that
Yeah.
that that you, I guess it goes both ways. That there was definitely levels to the quality of code that you could write and the complexity that it could handle. Like this product went deep. And so I saw that for the first time. Like I got firsthand experience with how truly complicated the software could be. So like that was one thing that I was exposed to. But then I was lucky because at Auth0, I wasn't just in the main engineering org. They were actually in the process of doing kind of an innovation lab and spinning out one of their most interesting features as a standalone product, basically a feature as a service. So if you want to have a feature like this in your product, then you can pay us, and you can use this feature on your own. And the idea was kind of like embeddable webhooks. So if you had a login experience and you wanted to do something during one of the key points in the login flow, and you wanted to, create an account in Salesforce or something like that, then rather than waiting on Auth0 to create that functionality for you, you could embed your own little script that would be called as though it were a webhook, but it was hosted inside of their infrastructure. So all you had to do was write the code inside of the code editor with all their little helpers and package managers, and everything was all kind of embedded in the experience. And then you could customize, different parts of the flow. So that was called Extend, and they were working on that. So I was still part of a relatively small team, but I definitely felt like the smallest fish in that pond. Like I was dealing with some incredibly talented and smart people. And so the whole time I was just trying to figure out, how do I fit on this team, and how do I make sure that I'm as valuable as possible and that I don't break anything, was kind of like where my head was at the time. And it just leveled up my confidence. I was able to contribute meaningfully across many different areas of that code base in a short amount of time. And I said, you know what? They hired me. These people that I look up to, who I think are so smart and so experienced, saw something in me, and now look at me. I'm in here. I'm doing it. I'm doing the thing. And so I think that's kind of where I eventually put the imposter syndrome to bed. Not that I don't feel like an imposter sometimes, but I now know that everyone kind of feels that way. Everyone feels a gap between who they are and the things that they wish that they knew. And just like engineering as a discipline has so many things to learn, business is, just a bigger circle that includes more concepts, and there's more things to learn. So when you're going to go do a startup, now you might be a CTO, so you're concerned about engineering concepts, but now you need to also go figure out financing, and you need to go figure out people management. And maybe this is the first time you've ever really been a leader of leaders. And so like it's just a rushing nesting doll of concepts that you need to go figure out. And you realize, I'm never going to figure out all of this, and I don't have to. I'm actually going, if I do my job well, all I'm trying to do is lay a foundation for a good business, and then I can hire the right people. When I was building, and maybe we can talk a little bit about Droplet now, but when I was first thinking about Droplet, there were so many times where I said, I know that the product will eventually need to do this thing, and I don't know how to do it. But that's okay, because by the time we get there, I'm going to hire someone way smarter than me, and that person's going to help me to figure out how to do this thing. And that was something that I learned on my journey. I wouldn't have had the maturity to say that at the beginning. I would have thought, I can't do this. I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z, and we need it in order for the product to work. But because I had been at Lead Train and saw, you don't need 1,000 features. That's not what makes a successful product. And then I was at Auth0, and I said, oh my gosh, there are so many people, so smart, so much smarter than me. And at some point, they can come and work at my company, and I can benefit from their experience and expertise. It doesn't have to all rest on me. And so it naturally led to me being prepared to do what I did at Droplet.
Wow, that is some powerful stuff. I think a lot of people, they want to be entrepreneurs super early on in their life. So I think everybody loves that aspiration. But where I think sometimes that can get lost is that perspective that you were able to gain from working at a startup and then working at a very established tech, company, starting from scratch, but then contributing to a very technically complex code base. It's impossible to predict a career to do both of those things. But, it certainly seems very clear in retrospect how beneficial having those two experiences would be. Sure. And then, combining it with the other sales and marketing and customer success stuff, it really does lead super well into, you finally taking that step to start your own company. So, talk to me a little bit about the insight that came from starting your business, and then a little bit about Droplet, and just kind of like as a precursor, I love what you guys are doing. And to be honest, I can't believe that we still live in a world where Droplet is still so essential. You forget that so many companies aren't where they need to be technologically speaking. I think that especially as an entrepreneur, you think, oh yeah, everybody's thinking forward, and that is so not true. And Droplet really helps to bridge that gap. So, would love to hear some of those early insights and how you guys started to dominate.
For sure. Thank you. Well, it started when I was at Qualtrics. So I was working at Qualtrics at the same time as what would eventually be my co-founder at Droplet. And I didn't meet him at Qualtrics. We'd actually been best friends since we were little kids. And so we had moved out to Utah from our hometown together, and we worked at a lot of the same places, and Qualtrics was one of those places. But when we were there, my co-founder was working on the sales team, and he got the chance to try to take Qualtrics into K-12 as a new vertical. Qualtrics had a little bit of revenue there, but not really anything, not much to speak of. And so they were really dominating in other segments like higher education, and were pushing out into private sector. And so this was kind of like an innovation lab. They were saying, hey, let's go and see if we can stand up this vertical. We don't know what the playbook is going to be. We don't know what the pricing is going to look like. We don't know what the customer profile is going to look like. You don't have any marketing assets. And so when he was trying to take Qualtrics to that industry or to that vertical, he learned of a problem where people said, hey, can we use Qualtrics to solve our paperwork problem? We're trying to do student registration, budget requests, time off requests. There was just hundreds of these papers that were getting passed around from school to school up to the district office. They had mail runners on payroll, and he would come and tell me that these conversations he was having, and we were both shocked that was how they were being run. We're like, why aren't they using DocuSign or a digital form? Like, what's the gap? And at this point, we're both kind of pretty entrepreneurial. So we're like, is there like a business here? And it came down to the fact that the shape of the problem, which I talk about this a lot. A lot of times I'm trying to encourage the team to say, like, what's the shape of the problem? Because I like to think of a solution as being something that you wrap around the problem. And so the more clearly that you understand the shape of the problem, the tighter your solution can be around the problem. And you want it to be tight, because all that space between your solution and the problem itself is where the incidental complexity creeps in to your platform and to the experience that your customers are having. You can't have a solution that's more simple than the problem that it's attempting to solve. And so the idea is that the problem describes the minimum area under which your solution can live. And so you're trying to identify where are the bumps and ridges and where's the core of this problem, so that way you can shrink wrap around it with your solution. Because you want your solution to be as simple as you can. You don't want that incidental complexity that builds up, degrades the customer experience, and also makes your code base harder to maintain. So you want it to be as simple as possible. So we were talking about it. We said, what's the shape of the problem that they're facing? And it felt like we could boil it all the way down to people need to collect some data, and then someone else needs to either see the data, add data to it, or action on the data. And it was this chain of collecting data, letting someone else know, collecting more data, routing it to the next person. Other things need to happen as a result of the data that you've collected. This was the shape of the problem. And when we looked around, we said, well, that's not quite what something like DocuSign does. DocuSign is really good at, here's the contract, here's all the things, and we need some signatures from you. And especially in like a straight line. And so we said that was our initial stab. Like, why don't you guys buy DocuSign and use that? And they're like, well, it's hard to draw inputs. We've got hundreds of pieces of information that we're trying to collect about each student. Imagine trying to draw a checkbox on top of each school location. It's expensive. So this was the feedback we were getting from what would be our future customers. And so we ended up kind of shelving the idea for a few years. I think both of us understood that we weren't in a position in our careers to go and tackle the problem, but we knew it was interesting. And so we said, man, maybe there's something here. We should think about this in the future. So we both went off, and I went to Lead Train and Auth0 and had those experiences. And my co-founder went off, and he went to another big established company, and then went on to a startup. And that was his very first startup. And at that point, I felt like all of the stars aligned. I was constantly bugging him like, hey, we can do this. You can sell it. I can build it. We can do this. And he was like, no, I'm doing sales. And then he went to a startup, and he felt the magic of being in a small room and having an insane amount of impact. And he came back to me and he said, bro, we can do this. And I said, I know, let's do this. So the time of the world, it was 2020. COVID was just starting to be a thing. And so it made sense. We're like, hey, everyone's kind of shutting down. The world feels uncertain. What if we go into a cave for a few months and we came out with our own product and we saw, and if it doesn't work, it's fine. We'll go out. We're both have skills. We can both get jobs. And that was the kind of confidence that we didn't have early in our careers either. Like, hey, if I quit my job now, it's okay. I can go get another one. And maybe that was naive, but we had that confidence that we were like, hey, it's okay. We'll just do this. What's the worst thing that could happen? Let's just try. And so we started to build it. We literally moved into my garage. I have a back garage, like a shed, and we turned it into a studio office. And my co-founder moved into that space. And so every day my morning commute was walking out the sliding door and crossing my yard and going into the garage.
Oh, I love this story so much. I did not know this part of the story. You're kidding.
Oh, so he literally moved in. And so like the mechanics of it, where we're like, how do we stretch out our timeline to like give ourselves the best chance of figuring something out? And he had some renters in his home, and he's like, hey, I can fully book it out, including my own room, and I can come live in your garage. So my cost of living drops to basically zero. And so he's like, so I could do this for months and maybe like a year. And I had saved up a bunch of money for this moment. I had a mortgage and a family and kids, and I knew that if I was ever going to live out my dream of doing my own thing, that I needed to have some money. And so I had, over years, had just slowly built up a little bit of savings, and it was marked as, this is our startup fund. And so we were prepared to spend all of that money, and he was prepared to live in that garage until we either figured it out or just had to go back to having, just regular jobs. And around that, so the most crazy, the craziest part about building Droplet was sitting in that garage and saying, where do we start? Right? We had incorporated the company. We used Stripe Atlas to do that. And so we had an official company that could be invested in, and we had done everything as best as we knew how. And we were just learning as we went, like how to do that. And then we got an inbound email from an accelerator fund. And they said, hey, we noticed that you changed your LinkedIn profiles. Are you guys starting something? And we're like, yes. And at this point, we had like nothing. We had nothing. We'd like just incorporated the company. We hadn't built anything. We didn't have any customers. And they're like, hey, pitch us on what your idea is, and we might give you some money and help you through our accelerator. And we're like, okay. This was something we hadn't considered. We weren't thinking, we're going to go raise money. We're going to go do the VC route. And so Mike, my co-founder, put together a slideshow. In retrospect, we didn't know what we didn't know. So it was a terrible pitch. Our TAM was way too small, and our idea was not nearly ambitious enough. And we probably didn't explain it very clearly at all, because at that point, we hardly knew what it was that we were going to build. But they liked us, which it turns out in like the early days, that's actually kind of 90% of like your very early funding is just, do you like the founders and think that they've got some go-getter attitude. And so we raised a little bit of money to do like a small pre-seed round and went through their accelerator. And as part of that accelerator, we were introduced subsequently to a lot of investors because they have a demo day, kind of like Y Combinator. And so in the meantime, the whole accelerator was, let's get your product built, let's get it to market, let's start generating revenue, so that way when demo day comes around, you have some sort of traction to show, and maybe you'll be lucky, and one of those lucky few, to get some seed funding. And for me personally, the experience was massively overwhelming. My co-founder was not particularly focused on product. He had basically just niched down into sales. And so the whole, what is this thing we're building and how is it going to work, largely fell to me. And so when I try to talk to him like, hey, I'm kind of thinking about this builder and this thing, I could see that he wasn't interested. His eyes would kind of glaze over, and he's like looking at his watch like, I should be making calls and trying to sell this thing. And so I was like, okay, I have to just go figure this out. And that was really tricky. I think it's something that a lot of people don't talk about in the beginning. It's just this sort of the difficulty of inventing or innovating. It's that whole defining the problem and trying to be as clear about it and accurate about it as you can be, so that way you're not wandering around in the desert. So the way I found focus was I went to my co-founder and I said, hey, what does the ideal demo look like? Because we were very focused on revenue. We knew that the best kind of traction was the best kind of validation and traction was people paying us money for something. And so we knew that we were going to be demoing pretty much right out of the gate something. And he said, well, I'm going to go on those school websites and I'm going to find examples of PDFs that look particularly painful. And the PDFs are going to say the name of the person that's supposed to sign it. And I'm going to go on their directory and I'm going to find their phone number and I'm going to call them. And I'm going to say, hey, it looks like you're on this atrocious PDF. Is that a pain? Because it looks like it's a big pain. And he said, it'd be great if in that phone call, I could say, and look at what it will be like. And if we could have a version of the PDF that looked like a web form that they could just fill out. And now this would help them to bridge that gap, that imagination, help them to imagine what the future would look like. And so, okay. What kind of data do you collect on a PDF? Well, we're going to need inputs and we're going to need drop downs and we're going to need radio buttons. And I just started from there. I said, I'm going to build a form builder, or I'm going to build a thing that looks like a form, right? All of this is about trying to say, what's that tiniest thing that you can build that will get you over the hump and unlock that next opportunity, whether that's the funding that you need or the revenue that you need or the insights that you need to do the next thing. And so I didn't do a deployment process. I didn't set up AWS. I didn't get a server going. I went into a code sandbox because ultimately our customers didn't know or care the difference between a URL that said Droplet in it or one that said code sandbox. So I set up a code sandbox and I set it up in such a way that Mike could write some HTML-like code and it would create a demo form that had some interactivity in it. So he could click a drop down, and if he picked the other button, an other input would appear next to it. We were trying to squeeze in any sort of pizzazz into it that we could to try to make it look more than just like a really womp womp form. And so that's where we started. We started with smoke and mirrors and saying imagine what this could be. And when he would do the sales calls, I'd sit off to the side and customers would ask hey, does it do this? Does it do that? And I would basically be out of the screen out of the view of the camera, thumbs upping and thumbs downing things that I thought I could ship in time for the customer if they bought. Right? And that's how we did it. We just sold ahead, but never we were always very conscious to not be unethical. It was never promising things. That's why I was there. I was there to say yeah, we can do this, or no, we can't. And he would reassure me because sometimes I'd be how am I going to deliver on this promise? And he'd say, it's okay. We'll tell them that they're going to start a month from now. And now you've got 4 weeks to hack away at that thing. And we just need to clear the bar of what we promised them. And if something happens and you're doing your best and you can't figure out how to ship the thing that we promised them, he said, I'll own it. I'll go back to the customer and I'll say, hey, we thought we were going to be able to release this feature in time. We can't. We'd like to give you your money back. He's like, but I think you can do it. And I'm like, okay. Right. And I'd go in there and I'd figure it out. And it turns out I was always able to just barely stay in front of whatever we promised the customer. And so this informed our vision of what we needed to go build next. It was almost always motivated by a customer saying, hey, can it do this? Can it do that? And we didn't just blindly build it. There was always this weighing out of how reasonable is this ask? How quickly can I build it? How closely do I think it maps to a first principles solution? How closely do I think it maps to our core problem? And if it's way out here, way afield, then I would say no, even if I thought it was easy and I thought it might win the deal. Because as the product owner, I needed to make sure that we didn't end up going too far away from our core value in the early days. This is the only thing that gives you any hope of having a product that customers will understand and that they'll buy and that will work for them. You can't have too many weird exceptional cases. At least that's always been my product philosophy. You can't let dollars or potential deals pull your product too far away from your core value. And that's just me. I know there are people who are yelling right now saying that's wrong. That's where all your best insights come from. But for me, it's worked. We had a very ambitious core problem that we were trying to solve. and there were a lot of tentacles places you could take it. And so for me, I would always note, hey, they might want this. It might make sense for us to do this feature or that feature in the future. But it didn't ever pull my roadmap so far afield that it gave us crazy technical debt or complicated the product. So now it wasn't clear what we were anymore. We tried to stay true to that vision.
Oh, I will always remember that story of you on the sales calls going like that. That is amazing. And, geez, that is as scrappy as it gets. And I had no idea that Mike actually moved in with you. Amazing. Yeah. You know, that kind of price, every single startup journey is different. Every single founding dynamic is completely unique. But having that account set aside that says, hey, I want to do this so badly so that when the opportunity comes, I'm ready to take advantage. So many good lessons for people to take away just as far as entrepreneurship generally. Love it. I do want to know, when you're sitting there, just that moment of that innovation or invention, mm-hmm. How did you even decide, like, hey, well, what tech stack am I going to use? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, even something as simple as that, I just would like to explore that for a second, because, that first line of code, what was your thought process to going into what's my tech stack going to be?
This was something that I had spent, something that we didn't discuss was the couple of years leading up to the start of Droplet. I had also been working on the side as a freelance developer. So I used Upwork to just kind of tackle jobs, and it gave me a way to make extra money. And that extra money was literally what funded my startup savings account. And I liked that because it gave me an opportunity to go from 0 to 1 over and over and over again. Because most of those jobs are, hey, I've got an idea, like, can someone build this thing for me? And I liked it because it gave me a chance to kind of be a startup consultant also. A lot of the times I'd see an idea and I'd go, okay, that sounds pretty good, but what if we changed it a little bit and made it like this? So a lot of the times how I won jobs was I'd show a lot of interest in what they were building, and I'd ask them questions around, hey, have you thought about this? Have you built anything yet? And they'd go, wow, this engineer isn't just saying, like, yeah, I can bang out a script really quick. He wants to engage with me around this idea. And a lot of times I'd be able to kind of coach people and say, well, I think that the core of the problem you're trying to solve is this. And so I just got reps in that way. I'd say, I'd hear their problems. I'd hear the insights that they got from their potential customers. And I'd sort of try to coach them into building what I thought was the simplest, best product that got them to market. And I did that a bunch. And so I had a personal tech stack from my career and also from these side projects. And I just reached for that. I think that's good advice. I think that whatever your tech stack is that you're comfortable with is a reasonable tech stack to start with. Most of us are working with a stack that is commercially viable because we learned it on the job, or we became experts in it on the job. And so I don't think there's much risk in people starting a company with like a really weird language, because I don't think most people have production experience with weird languages or weird stacks. And if you're tempted to use a weird language or weird stack, you shouldn't, is my strong opinion on that. And so our stack was very vanilla. It was a JavaScript stack. We knew we could hire. Utah was has a really strong JavaScript community. And so we knew that a React, Node, Postgres, AWS stack was going to be like right in the middle of the fairway. And so I spent basically zero time worrying about my stack.
Well, and you wouldn't with that. I think that is the classic startup stack for anybody looking to do something. And you're right. I mean, we initially started building on Angular because that's what we had. In retrospect, though, it would have just been nice to bite the bullet and tell that engineer that knew Angular to just say, hey, just spend a month, getting real comfortable with React, and then we'll go there. Because we knew that that's what was going to be way better to hire for.
Sure.
But it's what we had at the time was Angular. And so, you learn. But I really like that you had that kind of, by the time some people listen to this, who knows how the world will change.
React might be the new Angular. Yeah.
Right. So as you guys deal and as you guys look into the future, you guys are bringing organizations that are stuck in the past into the present, but the future is moving forward in a really powerful way.
Yeah.
What are you guys thinking of as far as the future of, Droplet that you can share?
Sure.
What are some things that are exciting for you for helping some of these organizations? If you can share anything around that, would love to
Sure.
hear it.
Yeah. So I think this is where we kind of return to the idea of like, what's the core problem? So when I set out to try to design this product or this platform and the stack of features and technology that was going to solve the problem, I tried to look forward. I tried to say, if we're talking about multi-step forms and approval workflows, if we're talking about creating packets of forms, things like onboarding, offboarding, things where you need to take multiple forms with their own individual workflows and combine them together and relate them to a particular employee. And then if you're going to also have data sets powering these, so you're going to have ways in which you want to store, locations and personnel, and you're going to want to create relationships between those data sets and utilize them across forms and workflows. I felt like all of these concepts of collecting data, routing them around, logically combining those outputs into packets or into personas, creating data sets to power all of that, it all felt fairly first principles to me. It felt like we were getting at the root of what it means to even just do application development, right? It's about collecting data and actioning on it. So I tried to stay fairly zoomed out and say, what are the primitives that we're going to build? And then later on, we're going to layer on ease of use. So a unique path that we took to market was that many of our features were intended to be internal first. And we had a kind of mechanical Turk approach to building our very first solutions for customers, rather than setting out to build a complete what you see is what you get WYSIWYG drag and drop form and workflow builder, which is obviously very complicated and hard to build. And then the idea that what are you dragging? And how does that thing that you drag onto the form, how does it work? There were so many layers of questions that we knew that we wanted to build our way up to that complexity. And so we focused on initially doing a professional services model with internal builder tools that allowed us to learn what are the features that this platform needs from the most advanced side of things. What would we build if we were building for our most advanced persona? And then how do we deliver a solution to our most basic customers using those tools? And I think a similar approach applies when I look into the future. When I look at something like AI, I'm looking at it and trying to say, how do I think this will impact that problem? How do I think AI will interface with the way in which we collect data, the way in which we intelligently route it around, the way in which we store it, and the way in which we integrate it with other important systems of record? And if you just spend some time thinking about that, lots of great ideas come up. And I think that rather than being worried about disruption, I'm excited about innovation. I'm excited about disrupting our product in important ways to make the experience better. And when you're focused on customer value and on their experience first and foremost, there is no sacred cow in your product. There's areas in which there's friction, and new technology unlocks ways to deliver a better experience and more value to your customers, which if you're agile enough, if you've built a product that's robust enough, if you've built a product team that can innovate and can move quickly without dealing with crippling technical debt, then you're positioned in a way where technology unlocks value for your company and for your customers. Well, first for your customers, and as a result for your company. And so that's how I'm thinking about AI. I'm looking at it and saying, how are we going to disrupt ourselves with new technology? And obviously, AI is just the hot new thing. But I think it's a first principles approach. We're looking at it and we're saying, what can we do for our customers to make this experience better? And so I think the way in which technology is rapidly accelerating only supports our business rather than undermines it.
Couldn't agree with you more. One of the last question that I wanted to ask is that you guys at Droplet have kept your team intentionally on the technology side, intentionally lean. Talk to me a little bit about how you've been able to extrapolate, such massive production from a smaller team. I think that it's tempting in a technology company to have a lot of engineers and to have that. So just talk to me a little bit about the thoughts that went into, the team. Obviously, it's going to change a lot in the future, but at least for, this 0 to 1 story for Droplet, would love to hear.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that you see progress. It's easier to see progress externally than internally. And so I think something to remind yourself is that it feels really slow. Your product development is always going to feel slower than you would like. And you only really see the progress when you look back. So this is something that we try to make a regular habit of, is keeping track of our new product features, functionality, and releases. And every 6 to 12 months, we like to stop and celebrate with the team. Here's what the product team has accomplished in the last 6 months. And it's always shocking every single time. You look back and you go, wow, I forgot that it was just 6 months ago that we didn't have such and such feature. We have screen recordings of our app over time where you just kind of click through our dashboard, and it's crazy to just look, a year back. You don't appreciate it. It's like growing when you're a kid. That you measure the line on the wall, and then the next year you're like up 6 inches, and you're like, where did all this height come from? And so I think when it gets, so first off, have some grace with yourself. Like, product development is super hard, and it always feels like you could be going faster. But I have a personal philosophy with product development that I think it's right, even in the pretty early days, to trade quality for speed a little bit. There's a balance for sure. You need to get to market, but I think it doesn't come from sacrificing quality so much as being very precise about what you're building. Right? That's my emphasis on, like, identifying the core of the problem, because then you only build that 20%. You only build that tiny portion of the solution, and you can afford to do that part well, right? And you can afford to take a little bit of time and look into the future. And because you spend that time well, that efficiency builds over time. You instead of slowing down, you speed up. A lot of the times for our platform, we'll realize by accident that one feature unlocks complex, compound functionality that we didn't anticipate when we built it. So, for example, we built forms, and then we built packets, a way to combine forms together to do things like onboarding. And then we built the ability to bulk submit forms. So if you have a CSV of teacher contracts that you want to send out, and you want to fill out the first step automatically, you can bulk submit, all of your teacher information. And now this kicks off 200 contract renewals. This was not something we imagined. This was something that, like, our customers said, hey, it'd be really awesome if it did this. But when we did that, we realized, hey, if a form can kick off a packet, we can bulk kick off, an onboarding from a CSV. It's things like that, where you take one piece and one piece connects with another piece, which connects with another piece. And when you lay the foundations well, there's sudden synergies within your platform that allow you to go faster than if you had just kind of been hapdash slashing everything in there. And so that's a big part of our speed, because we do have a team. For as long as the company's existed, we've probably averaged about 5 engineers-ish. I think right now we're at 6. But for a lot of that, it was just me. And then it was me and my head of engineering, who, by the way, was my manager at Auth0. So I guess a little side note is, like, I've always tried to pick up the best people that I can from role to role. I connect with the people that I think are smarter than me, and I try to maintain solid work relationships with them. And then when I leave a place, I try to stay in contact. And so then later on, when I'm hiring, I say, look, I know we work well together, and I know you like startups. This is the place for you. And it's a compelling argument for someone who's your friend. And so I brought those people in, and I benefited greatly from having team members who are smarter than me, who I gave a lot of autonomy. And I said, how do we go to the next level? And they said, well, given what what we have today, I can do this, this, and this. And we buckle in and we keep chipping away. Really building an enterprise platform is not about any one big feature. It's about the accumulation of hundreds of well thought out, synergistic, integrated features. And it's not sexy to build that thing. It takes time and it takes a thoughtfulness, and it's a slog. You're just slowly climbing up the mountain, one little feature at a time. And then you look back and you go, wow, look at what we've built. Look where we've gone in these last few years. So that's been my approach to product development.
Skyler, thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation. I feel like I'm definitely walking away with way more than I had coming in here. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to catching up with you again. Thank you.
100%. Thank you. Anytime.